And we'll talk a little bit more about formative assessment. Here's a question. All right, so you're designing exams, quizzes, grades. What form can they take? My graduate teaching assistant will distribute the handouts. What kind of tests can we give students? Well, we mentioned one, multiple choice.
Short essay. Short essay.
Short essays or short essays?
Case studies. Case studies, problem solving.
Case studies, problem solving.
Project presentations.
Loud, please.
Project presentations.
Project present. We can get them work on a project. That's one thing, and then we could have them present the results of that project. Fantastic. Role play.
Writing the
A report, writing a report, clinical exams, applications, problem solving, yes?
Assignments.
Assignments, we give them homework assignments, they have to hand them in. All right, there are multiple ways of assessing learning. We mentioned many of them. You have options. One more? He's got time. We need one more over here, please. Or maybe not. There are multiple ways. When you're designing a class, don't test the same way all the time. I had a conversation with someone yesterday. The days are just kind of folding one into the other. But she said, you know, I usually use the same kind of exam. You didn't get it? Here, you have mine. And she does the grown-up version. A woman came up to me after the presentation yesterday, after this presentation, and said, you know, I give the same exam to everyone, but one student missed the exam or she had some problem with the exam. So instead of just giving her the same exam, she gave her an essay, a report, kind of a research essay to do. And she said, you know what? This student never did well on the multiple choice exams. But she did incredible. She got an A on this research essay. And the question was, is it fair? How do I deal with these students who seem to have different abilities? And you know, probably if I surveyed us in here, some of us do really well on multiple choice tests. Some of us do a whole lot better on essay tests. Some of us, give me a problem, let me manipulate it, I'll solve it. So the question is, should you test the same way always? Or maybe vary the exam technique that gives different people with different abilities and expertise a chance to shine, a chance to do well. And if you believe that people learn differently, then people probably test differently also. And there's one, again. And if you notice in that little blue box, there's some people that give group tests. Interesting, radical, strange. You get 2 or 3 people together, and they take the test, they help each other. Again, tests serve two purposes. Well, tests can serve 2 purposes, to learn and to grade. Some people use group tests. Here's a radical, strange, I would never advocate this, but it's so unusual that I'll tell you about it. I went to a presentation once on collaborative, cooperative learning. And the professor, he was a professor at Boston University, in Boston, Massachusetts. He said, I use cooperative group learning throughout the course, even in grading and assessment. And we said, how do you do that? He says, when I give an exam, I tell these 5 people they're going to have an exam, and they have to study together and make sure each of them knows the material well enough. They take the exam, and I grade each of them individually. They get a score for that. Then I mix the 5 scores up, and I pull one out, and I grade that, and I give that score to everyone else also. So the students get their own individual score, and they get the score, and he averages the 2 of them out. Because he said if they truly cooperated and help each other, then they all should be able to get the same grade. Right?
But this is unfair.
That's what everyone in the audience said. How did you do that?
Students have different abilities.
I know. I told you it was crazy and unfair, but this was a reputable professor who's taking kind of cooperative learning to the extreme. Extreme. I would never advocate doing that. Don't think that I'm suggesting. I'm just saying there are possibilities out there that we have never thought of. Yes, sir.
We actually are doing this. We are doing this, but not in the exam. For example, student could have, everyone will have the exam, but if we are doing, for example, like a report or project, the project usually have several members. We are trying to measure some outcome from this, which is the cooperation, student cooperation, ability to work in a team. So we give a project, and each one of them is assigned to a certain task in this, and we ask them actually at the end to present, and we give them, each one have its own grade in some specific point.
But then there's a group grade.
But there is a group evaluation at the end to show that this group is disconnected from the other group.
Fantastic.
So we are actually doing this,
Great.
at least in engineering. Yeah.
Great. Oh, engineering has been doing this for years.
Still, the students have their own grade.
Students had their own grade in this too, but it's also, there's maybe 1/3 of the grade is the group grade, 2/3 is the personal grade. So it's the extreme variation of what he's talking about. Excellent, wonderful. So here's a couple of other thoughts about testing. I implied a few minutes ago that tests have 2 purposes. We tend to think of them as having one purpose. That's to assign a grade. However, there's research going on, very significant research, at an institution called Washington University of St. Louis. It's logically in the city of St. Louis in Missouri. Number of psychologists there. There's 15, 20 years of research on something called the testing effect. The testing effect. And their research is showing that tests not only serve to come up with a grade, they stimulate learning.
They improve learning.
They stimulate and improve learning. That when you encode information, you study something, you're putting it into long-term memory, hopefully. That does something, but when you retrieve that information, that does even more. Retrieving knowledge from memory encourages, supports, reinforced memory than just additional study. Let me say that again. You can study, and what do we tell students? Go back and study it again. Study again. What we should say is take another test on it. Take another test on it. So let me read something. This is called The Power of Testing Memory. You can't, I'm sure, read this from where you are. Maybe you can. I'll read some of the highlighted lines in yellow. Tests enhance later retention more than additional study of the material. Wow. Students do not like to take tests, and teachers and professors do not like to grade them. That's kind of a given. The traditional perspective of educators is to view tests and examinations and as assessment devices to measure what a student knows. Still critical, although this is certainly one function, very important function. We argue that testing not only measures knowledge, but also changes it. It often greatly improves retention of the tested knowledge. Taking a test on material can have a greater positive effect on future retention of that material than spending an equivalent additional amount of time restudying the material. Isn't that interesting? So tests can help students learn, but we don't sell the tests in that way, and students don't think of the tests in that way. Tests are a punishment, right? Why are you punishing me with this test? Or if they don't do well on a test, it's your fault. Teacher made a bad test. Teacher told me to study the wrong stuff. You know, it's an adversarial thing. Well, we need to see if we can reframe that. Here's a word I want you to write down. Very important word. Everyone write this down. You'll be graded on whether you write this down. The word is transparency. 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 What do I mean by transparency? I mean, it's okay to tell students why you're doing what you're doing. If you're using group work in your class, tell students why. Don't let them try to guess at your methods, because they may guess wrong. They may guess that you're using group work because you don't know enough to teach the material yourself, right? You're taking the easy way out. You're making us learn by ourselves instead of... There's a classic comment, I don't think this is true, but I've heard this said many times, where a department head came in to observe a teacher teaching a class, and the teacher had the group students in small groups, and they're working, and the observer comes in, looks for a few minutes, and walks over to the teacher and says, "I'll come back some other time when you're teaching." As if teaching only is talking. It's the only way of teaching. So be transparent. If you're using a different technique, tell students why. If you're using multiple tests, tell them why. Show them the research. We're going to talk about some evidence-based teaching. We know about evidence-based medicine. Well, there's evidence-based teaching out there too. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, if you kind of believe the power of testing, of the power of the testing effect, here's my extreme application of what research says works. This is my ideal testing method for an undergraduate class. And if you notice on the bottom, what does ideal mean? Very often it means impossible. So, let me explain this to you. Some of you, I think, may have experienced this or may do some variation of this. So I'm teaching a 15-week undergraduate class. After the first week, I give a quiz on that week's material. After the second week, I give a quiz on just that second week's material. Third week on just that third week. Fourth week on just that fourth week. Fifth week, a comprehensive exam on all 5 weeks. Repeat that, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, comprehensive. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, comprehensive. All right, so usual pushback I get. This is too much work. I got too many students. I can't be doing all of it. The quizzes can take various formats. It could be on a blackboard 5-question, 10-point online quiz. The computer grades it itself. It could be a 5-point multiple choice test. It could be 10 short answer questions. It could be questions that students grade in class themselves. It could be you put a code, a number on instead of a student name, you pass them around and students grade them for you. So there's lots of ways of doing quizzes that don't necessarily mean an extra burden. Now the comprehensive exam. Let's say you're in week 10, the second comprehensive exam. There's a question, how should they be weighted? Well, my suggestion is kind of a recency effect. The more recent information is more tested than the older information. So while there's still questions on week 1, it might be 1 or 2 questions, whereas on the material covered in week 8, there's 4 or 5 questions. All right? But you're still forcing students to go back, to retest, to relearn. You're giving all those encoding and decoding, input, retrieval opportunities for students. Initially, they will hate it because they're not used to it. Okay? What you're doing is you're holding students accountable for their learning. And what you will usually find is you're reinforcing them because their end of the semester grades tend to be higher. Anyone do something like this?
Not that extreme, but
Okay. This is the Mercedes version. You may only afford a Toyota. Okay. So think. Yes, ma'am.
this will make more burden on students. They are all the time under stress. They have a quiz every week and then comprehensive exam every 4 or 5 weeks. This will not make them always under pressure.
No, because they're getting feedback about how well they're doing. And if they do well on the quizzes, then they're not going to be that, that bad.
So the question is just for feedback, formative.
No. Students don't do optional. Students don't do voluntary. They do what counts. So if you're going to do this, those quizzes have to count. Now you can do something like, if you think you're getting them a little too anxious, you could say, there are 13 quizzes, 12 quizzes. There are 12 quizzes. I'll drop 2. I'll take the 10 highest quiz. So there are lots of ways of massaging this.
How do you distribute your final grade out of 100 on this format?
Well, I come up with a point total. The final exam is worth this many points. The second comprehensive is this way. Maybe it's 30 points, 60 points, 90 points, and then the quizzes are worth 5 points each or whatever. So I come up with some numerical weighting. Yes, sir.
At the end of
Please go ahead.
No, you can go first because I haven't heard you.
no need for weekly quiz. At the end of each chapter, we can make a quiz for the exam.
Yeah.
At the end of each chapter.
Each unit.
That's better than midterm and final.
Yeah.
Because another principle of learning says test early and test often. Small multiple tests, many small multiple tests are better than few big tests. Yes?
Actually, I reverse what you said, that we measure how well the students are doing. In fact, I do it in a reverse way, how well I did with the student, not how the student did well. So what we do, we need really to measure. We are focusing that the student should capture the information. So we give them a quiz. And probably most of them are not doing well. So what we do again, we give them the quiz again at home. At home to resolve it. To resolve it. And they bring it back and we also grade it. Many of the time, we notice the student do well in the exam because they are forced to come to the quiz. They solve it also at home and they did well because of this in the exam. So we have 1 point low and we have 2 points high. The ones that they solve it at home and the ones that they solve it in the exam. So now we elevated the student by the effort, not by my grading.
Okay, you better watch out because you're going to get a bad reputation on this campus for focusing on student learning instead of teaching. You run the risk of letting people know that you're worried about how much students are learning. It's great. All right. I'm going to change my approach here for a minute. You have a handout. Now I think you have a handout called Classroom Assessment Techniques. I'd like you to spend a minute or two and just kind of glance through this. Classroom Assessment Techniques. And then I'll kind of talk about what these are and how to use these.
Microscope for use. Microscope for use.
Well, it's better than the one you had before. It's not as good as the ones that people who came yesterday got, but you don't have a microscope on your iPhone?
Good idea.
Okay, classroom assessment techniques, very short, very quickly, are simple, small ways of getting formative feedback, process feedback about how students are learning and how well you are teaching. And so in your course design, what I suggest is you not only think about summative, how are you going to grade, how am I going to assess, how am I going to design and distribute my tests during the course, but how can I include small, low-risk opportunities for students to give me feedback on whether they're getting it and how well I'm doing. So you can do one of these a week. You can do it different. They become interesting teaching techniques. They serve 2 purposes. They get students to reflect on what they're understanding or not understanding, and they're giving you feedback on those same issues so you can change your teaching. The muddiest point, you notice there's one called the muddiest point, the most simple thing. At the end of your class, you say, students, take out a piece of paper, don't write your name on it, or you can give them a little slip of paper, and you'd say, I'd like you to write on this paper the one thing that you're still confused about as a result of today's lecture. And they write it, and you say, I'm going to collect these, I'll read them tonight, and I'll give you feedback on your feedback.
عندي محاضرة. عندي محاضرة.
Muddiest point?
I told you, it's my wife calling. So that's the easiest. A variation of that is the 1-minute paper, where you ask 2 questions. What was the most important thing you learned today? or the most important things you learned today? And then the second question, what are you still confused about? Valuable information. First, it gets them to review and to process what went on in the lesson. And you now have data, okay, they got it. Most of them really picked up the key points. Uh-oh, there's some things that are still unclear. Let me go back. If the goal is learning and understanding, then it only takes a few extra minutes to help clarify a point. If you ask students the traditional way, who has a question, who doesn't understand something, and you get, there's a group of students in every class that I call the answer mafia. They're the ones, they tend to sit in the front, and they laugh at your jokes, and they're the first ones. And then everyone else knows that all they have to do is wait a few seconds, put their head down, don't make eye contact with the teacher. And the teacher's uncomfortable with silence, so the teacher's going to call on someone in the answer mafia. And so you have 5 or 10 people who are trying to answer, and the other 30, 40 people are zoned out. So asking a question often has just the opposite effect of what you want it to do. You want to ask a question and get people engaged in thinking. Really what it does is they know some people are going to answer and the rest of them don't have to even think about the question. I have an anecdote to that. I didn't talk about this in the last 3 days, so you're getting a bonus. I've developed a teaching technique, a questioning technique that I call the ATA approach. You all can't see that. I'll move this over. Okay. ATA. All right, this is my anecdote to asking a question in a large class, and I know I'm never going to get the kind of answers I want. I ask a question, and I ask students to write the answer alone by themselves. So that's the first step of ATA. This takes 3 minutes in a class, 3 minutes. Okay, what is photosynthesis? Let's have an example. I want you to write down, what is photosynthesis? Everyone write the answer, the definition of photosynthesis. Now. Yep, I'm demonstrating. This is demonstration of my ATA approach. Write photosynthesis.
About?
What is the definition? What is photosynthesis? Now, we all took introduction to biology somewhere in our deep, dark past. All right, then the next step in this process is I would like you to share your definition with the person sitting next to you. Talk for a minute. Talk. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Who would like to share their definitions? What brave soul here? Yes, ma'am. She's a biology teacher.
It's a process by which plants make their own food by using sunlight.
Okay. Anyone else? Definition of photosynthesis. All right. Say it one more time.
It's a process by which plants make their own food by using light energy.
Okay, fantastic. In my class, I'd get 2 or 3 people to share. Then the next step is go back and rewrite your first definition based on what you heard from other people. Simple. Easy technique. Introduce this in a lecture every 15, 20 minutes. You get activity, get some sharing of information, doesn't take a whole lot of time. Great technique.